Nobody told you it would happen like this. Not loudly, not with a confrontation or a clear moment you could point to and say, that is when it changed. It happened quietly. A meeting where your idea was heard and then credited to someone younger. A room that shifted its energy when you walked in, not with hostility, but with something almost worse than hostility. Indifference. A conversation where someone looked past you to the person behind you. A promotion that went to someone with half your experience and twice your confidence about it. A world that seemed suddenly to be moving at a frequency you were no longer automatically tuned to. And somewhere inside all of that, underneath the professional composure and the daily routine and the face you put on every morning, something in you asked a question you were almost ashamed to admit was there. Am I becoming invisible? If that question has ever crossed your mind, even once, even at 2 in the morning when you were honest enough to let it, then stay with me. Because the Stoics had an answer to that question, and it is not what you expect. If you are someone who is done being overlooked and ready to build the kind of presence that cannot be ignored, subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deep into Stoic wisdom through real stories that show you exactly how to become the most grounded, most powerful version of yourself. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Let's begin. 1. The moment it starts. Imagine a man named Victor. He is 44 years old, a senior architect at a firm in Atlanta that he helped build from 12 people to over 100. He has designed buildings that are still standing, still being used, still quietly testifying to 2 decades of precision and craft. He knows what he is worth. Or he did. Because something started happening in the last 18 months that he cannot fully explain but feels in his body every time he walks into a meeting. The junior architects, brilliant, fast, fluent in technologies Victor learned on the job while they learned them in school, have started presenting ideas with a certainty that Victor remembers having once. Not arrogance, certainty. The particular energy of someone who has not yet been wrong enough times to know how wrong they can be. And the partners, men Victor has worked beside for 15 years, have started listening to that certainty in a way they no longer quite listen to Victor's considered, measured, experience-weighted contributions. Victor is not being pushed out. Nobody is being cruel. He is being, gradually, almost imperceptibly, moved to the side. And here is what Victor does with that. He works harder. He arrives earlier. He produces more. He tries to match the energy of people 15 years younger than him in a game whose rules seem to have shifted without anyone announcing the change. And every night he drives home feeling not more valued, but more exhausted. Does any of this sound familiar? Now let's travel back. Not to Rome yet, not to a Senate chamber or a military campaign, but to a city on the edge of the ancient world, to Nicopolis in northwestern Greece sometime around 90 AD, and to a man who understood invisibility from the inside. Epictetus had been freed from slavery by this point. He was teaching philosophy in a small school to a small group of students. He had no title, no official position, no building with his name on it, no seat at any table where power was being decided. By every external measure, he was nobody. And yet, word spread. Students traveled from across the Roman Empire to sit in his classroom. Marcus Aurelius, who would become the most powerful man in the known world, kept Epictetus's words by his side and returned to them constantly for the rest of his life. How does a man with nothing become the most influential philosopher of his age? Epictetus wrote something that Victor needed to hear and that you need to hear right now. Seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourself. Victor was seeking the good in the room's reaction to him, in the partner's attention, in the junior architect's deference, in the external confirmation that he still mattered. And every time the room gave him less of that confirmation, he worked harder to earn it back, which is exactly the wrong direction. Because here is what the Stoics understood that Victor had forgotten. The moment you start performing for a room's approval, you have already handed that room your power. And a man who has handed his power to a room full of people who are gradually looking past him, that man is not going to get his power back by working harder. He is going to get it back by stopping, stopping the performance, stopping the scramble, stopping the exhausting, dignity-costing project of trying to make people see what they have decided, for their own unexamined reasons, not to look at. Victor eventually did something that felt counterintuitive in the extreme. He stopped trying to be seen, not by quitting, not by checking out, but by redirecting every unit of energy he had been spending on managing the room's perception of him and applying it to the work itself. Not the work as performance, the work as the thing that matters to him regardless of whether anyone is watching. And something shifted, not immediately, not in a meeting or a moment, but over weeks and then months. The quality of what Victor was producing changed in a way that the room, eventually, reluctantly, without ever quite acknowledging the shift, could not ignore. Because there is a difference that sophisticated people can feel, even when they cannot name it, between someone who is creating to be seen and someone who is creating because the creation itself demands it. The first produces work that wants your approval. The second produces work that does not need it. And work that does not need your approval is always more compelling than work that does. Here is the first principle. The moment they start ignoring you is the moment you must stop performing for their attention, not as defeat, as liberation. Redirect every ounce of energy that was going toward being seen and put it into being excellent. Excellence that does not require an audience is the beginning of becoming untouchable. The room will notice. They always notice. They just will not tell you when they do. 2. The trap that catches everyone. Now meet a woman named Diane. She is 47 years old, a marketing director in a tech company in Austin who has spent 20 years building campaigns that moved product, shifted perception, and generated the kind of revenue that gets noticed at the board level. She is not someone who has ever had to fight to be taken seriously. Until now. The company brought in a new CMO 8 months ago, 36 years old, former startup founder, fluent in the language of disruption and velocity and growth hacking, in a way that makes Diane's considered, data-grounded, long-view approach sound, she can see it in the new CMO's face, like something from another era. And Diane, who has never been insecure professionally, has fallen into a trap she did not see coming. She has started justifying herself. In every meeting, before anyone has questioned her, before any challenge has been issued, Diane preemptively defends her recommendations. She provides more data than the decision requires. She anticipates objections and addresses them before they are raised. She speaks with a precision that has curdled slightly into over-explanation. She is arguing her case to a jury that has not yet been convened. And here is the brutal truth that the Stoics would have told her without gentleness. Every justification you offer before it is requested is an advertisement for your insecurity. Every preemptive defense signals, more clearly than silence ever could, that you are not sure you deserve to be in the room. And people respond to that signal, not consciously, not cruelly, but they respond. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the private pages of his Meditations a reminder that he apparently needed to return to more than once. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Lose your self-respect. Diane had not lost it all at once. She had been lending it out, in small increments, every time she justified herself to a room that had not asked for the justification. And Seneca, who watched men destroy their own authority in Nero's court by trying too hard to keep it, wrote something that cuts to the center of Diane's situation. It is not that I am brave, but that I know which things are worth fighting for. Know which things are worth fighting for. Diane was fighting for the room's preemptive approval, for the new CMO's recognition before she had earned it on the terms that mattered, the results. For validation, she was trying to generate with words when the only currency that actually buys it is outcomes. She was spending herself on the wrong battle. And here is the pattern interrupt that changes everything. The most powerful person in any professional room is almost never the one explaining themselves the most. Think about the people in your own professional life who carry the most genuine authority, not the loudest people, not the most defensive people, the people who state their position once clearly, without the scaffolding of preemptive justification, and then let it stand. They do not need the room to agree before they are confident. They are confident, and then, sometimes, not always, and not as the point, the room agrees. Diane made a change that was so small it felt almost too small to matter. She stopped preempting. In the next meeting, when she presented a recommendation, she presented it. Without the defensive architecture, without the anticipatory objection handling, without the extra data she had assembled, not because the decision required it, but because her anxiety did. She said what she thought, once, clearly, and sat inside the silence that followed with a composure she had to practice. The CMO pushed back. Diane answered the specific pushback. Not the imagined broader challenge, just the specific question that was actually asked. And something in the room shifted, not dramatically but perceptibly, because a woman who has stopped defending herself before the attack arrives, that woman reads as someone who knows something the room does not. And knowing something the room does not is the beginning of being indispensable. Here is the second principle. Stop justifying yourself to rooms that have not asked for the justification. State your position once, clearly, without apology and without the defensive architecture of a person who is not sure they belong. Speak from the ground of someone who has already decided the answer to that question, because the room will always take its cue from you on that. If you are unsure, they will be unsure. If you are settled, they will feel it. Be settled. 3. What Marcus Aurelius knew about being overlooked. Now let's go to ancient Rome. Not to a battlefield this time, not to a Senate chamber, to a private room, a lamp, a man sitting alone with a journal he never intended anyone to read. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome for 19 years, the most powerful man in the known world by every external measure, and he was, for significant stretches of that reign, actively ignored, not by the public revered him, but by the people closest to power. His co-emperor Lucius Verus, who shared the throne and shared the glory, and contributed, in Marcus's private estimation, considerably less than his share of the actual governing. Senators who smiled in his presence and maneuvered against him in his absence. Military commanders who questioned his decisions through back channels rather than to his face. A man surrounded by people who needed him and underestimated him simultaneously. And what did Marcus do with that? He wrote, not to process his grievances, not to record the names of the people who had underestimated him for future reckoning. He wrote instructions to himself, reminders, standards he was trying to hold himself to in an environment that was constantly inviting him to lower them. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And then, more specifically, in a line that reads like a man talking himself down from the edge of a reaction he would regret. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. He wrote this not as cynicism, as preparation. He was inoculating himself every morning against the shock of being disappointed by people, because a person who is not shocked by disappointment cannot be destabilized by it. And here is what Marcus understood about being overlooked that most people in Victor and Diane's position never grasp. Being overlooked is only a problem if your sense of worth lives in other people's attention. If it lives there, in the room's response, in the CMO's recognition, in the partner's deference, then you are permanently vulnerable. Because rooms change, CMOs arrive, partners age out and new ones arrive with new preferences. The external landscape is always shifting, but if your sense of worth lives somewhere the landscape cannot reach, then the landscape can shift as much as it wants, and you remain exactly where you were. Imagine a man named Solomon. He is 51 years old, a civil court judge in Philadelphia, who spent 15 years as a defense attorney before ascending to the bench. He has seen more human behavior in those 15 years than most people see in a lifetime. He has watched brilliant people destroy themselves in courtrooms by caring too much about how they were being perceived in the moment and not enough about the substance of what they were actually doing. He does not make that mistake. When Solomon walks into his courtroom, there is something about him that attorneys on both sides feel before he says a single word. It is not intimidation, it is not coldness. It is the particular quality of a person who is entirely uninterested in your opinion of him. Not arrogantly, not as a performance of authority, he simply does not need it. And that needlessness is the most authoritative thing about him. Younger attorneys sometimes mistake it for aloofness. Older ones know exactly what it is. It is what Marcus Aurelius was building in those private pages by lamplight. The inner citadel, the place inside yourself where your worth lives, so thoroughly interior, so completely independent of external confirmation, that the people who are looking past you are not actually threatening anything real. They are just looking past you. And you are still exactly where you were. Here is the third principle. Move your sense of worth off the table. Stop keeping it somewhere that other people's behavior can reach. Build it somewhere internal, somewhere that requires no external confirmation to remain solid. Because a person whose worth does not live in the room's attention cannot be diminished by the room's inattention. That is not indifference. That is the beginning of untouchable. 4. The moment the room feels it. Now meet a woman named Grace. She is 43 years old, a senior partner at a law firm in Chicago, who has spent 18 years building a practice in employment law that is, by every measurable standard, exceptional. She is also, for the first time in her professional life, being made to feel like a supporting character in her own story. The firm brought in 2 lateral hires last year, both younger, both from more prominent firms, both arriving with the particular confidence of people who have been told they are exceptional for so long that it has become the water they swim in. And Grace, who built her practice from nothing, who has client relationships that span decades, who knows things about this work that cannot be learned in less than 15 years of doing it, has started shrinking, not dramatically, in the small ways that nobody talks about. She speaks less in partnership meetings. She defers to the laterals on decisions she would previously have led. She has started framing her contributions as suggestions rather than recommendations. She is disappearing herself, and she knows it. The night she admitted this to herself, sitting in her office at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, looking at a brief she had written that was better than anything either of the laterals had produced, and knowing she would present it tomorrow with less conviction than it deserved, was the night something changed. She thought of a line she had read once in a biography of Cato the Younger. Cato, who sat in the Roman Senate while Julius Caesar's allies tried to marginalize him, mock him, render him irrelevant, never once adjusted his posture to accommodate their project. He did not speak more loudly to compensate. He did not fight for floor time or position or the visible markers of importance. He simply continued to be exactly what he was, with complete unself-conscious consistency. And the thing about consistency, genuine, unperformed, unstrategic consistency, is that it is the most legible thing in any room. People can feel the difference between someone who is being consistent because they have decided to perform consistency, and someone who is being consistent because there is simply no other version of them available. Cato was the second kind, and Caesar, who feared very little, found Cato's consistency more unsettling than any argument or any army. Because you can argue with a position, you can outmaneuver a strategy, you can wait out a performance, but you cannot shake a person who is simply, completely, durably and without effort, themselves. Grace went into the partnership meeting the next morning and did something that required more courage than any courtroom moment in her career. She presented the brief exactly as she had written it, not as a suggestion, as a recommendation, not with the hedging language of someone who is not sure they belong, with the language of someone who has done this for 18 years and knows exactly what they are talking about. The room was briefly surprised, not by the quality, they had always known the quality, but by the register, by the frequency. She had come back online, and here is what nobody tells you about the moment you stop shrinking. The room does not gradually adjust. It snaps, not with applause, not with acknowledgement, but with a quality of attention that is different from what you were getting before. More present, more serious, more careful. Because a person who has stopped performing smallness is suddenly unpredictable in the best possible way. You do not know what they will say next. You only know it will be worth hearing. Here is the fourth principle. Stop performing smallness to make others comfortable. Your experience, your craft, your considered judgment, built over years that cannot be shortcut, These are not things to apologize for or soften or present as suggestions when they are actually recommendations. State them as what they are, consistently, without drama, without the performance of confidence that signals you are not quite sure. Just consistently. Be the same person in every room, at every temperature, under every pressure. That consistency is not stubbornness. It is the most powerful thing you can bring into a room that has been trying to decide what version of you to take seriously. Give them only one version, the real one, and make them rise to meet it. 5. What untouchable actually means. Finally, there is a man named Arthur. He is 62 years old, and he is what every principle in this video has been building toward. Not because his life is without difficulty, not because he found a formula that removed friction from his professional existence, but because Arthur is what it looks like when the principles have had time to settle into a person's bones. When they stop being practices you have to remind yourself to follow, and become simply the way you move through the world. He spent 30 years in corporate finance. He has been the youngest person in the room and the oldest. He has been the most powerful person in the room and the least. He has been hired and fired and promoted and overlooked and credited and ignored. And somewhere in his mid-50s, he cannot name the exact year, he arrived somewhere. Not at a destination with a flag planted in it, not at the end of a struggle, at himself. The full, unedited, unperforming version of himself that had always been there underneath the adaptations and the performances and the calculated adjustments to what the room seemed to require. When Arthur walks into a meeting now, he is not managing the room's perception of him. He is not performing authority or performing youth or performing anything. He is just there, completely, inconveniently, unmistakably there. And people feel it, not as intimidation, as gravity. The particular gravity of a person who needs nothing from you. Not your approval, not your attention, not your confirmation that he belongs in the room. He has already decided all of that before he walked in. Seneca wrote, in the final years of his life, years lived under the shadow of an emperor who had already decided he would eventually have to die, words that are the clearest articulation of what Arthur has become. Dum deferta vita transcurrit. While we delay, life passes. Arthur stopped delaying. He stopped delaying the full version of himself until the room was ready for it. Stopped waiting for the validation that would give him permission to show up completely. Stopped performing the adjusted, careful, room temperature version of himself that would ruffle no feathers and earn no enemies, and also guarantee no genuine presence. He arrived fully, without waiting for an invitation. And Marcus Aurelius wrote, in the line that Arthur has returned to more than any other, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Stop arguing, stop adjusting, stop waiting. Be it, now. In the meeting tomorrow, in the room where people have been looking past you, in the conversation where you have been preempting and shrinking and presenting suggestions when you meant recommendations. Be it tomorrow, not the performed version, not the version calibrated for the room's comfort, the actual one. Because here is what untouchable actually means, and it is not what most people think. It does not mean impervious to pain. Arthur still feels overlooked sometimes. He still encounters rooms that do not immediately understand what they are in the presence of. It does not mean universally respected. There are people who will never see it. People whose own limitations make them constitutionally incapable of recognizing what Arthur carries. Untouchable means this: their failure to see it does not change what it is. The room's inattention does not diminish the thing the room is failing to attend to. You remain exactly what you are, fully, consistently, without performance or apology, and you let the world catch up at whatever pace it manages. Some rooms catch up quickly, some never do, and both outcomes, are completely fine. Because you stopped requiring the room's verdict a long time ago. That is untouchable. That is what 40 years of living, if you let them teach you what they are trying to teach, produces. Not a person who has given up, a person who has arrived, so completely, so thoroughly, so irreversibly at themselves, that the question of whether the room has noticed is simply no longer the most interesting question in the room. We started today with a question most people are ashamed to admit they have asked: am I becoming invisible? And the Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Cato the Younger, answered it not with reassurance, but with something more valuable: a reframe. Invisibility is only a threat if your power lives in being seen. Move it somewhere else. Move it into the work itself, not as performance, but as the thing that demands to be done because it is worth doing. Move it out of the preemptive justifications and the defensive architecture and the suggestions that should be recommendations. Move it off the table where the room's attention can reach it. Move it into the consistency, the unperformed, unstrategic, simply yourself consistency that a room cannot argue with because there is nothing to argue against. And then, let the room catch up. It will. Not always, not immediately, not with the acknowledgement you might have wanted, but the gravity of a person who has stopped performing and started simply being. That gravity is not something a room can ignore forever. Victor learned it. Diane learned it. Grace learned it. Arthur arrived at it. And you, if you take one thing from this video and carry it into the week ahead, can begin building it today. Not tomorrow. Not when the room is ready. Today. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in the final pages of a journal no one was supposed to read: waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Stop arguing with the room about your worth. Be worth it. In the meeting tomorrow, in the conversation where you have been shrinking, in the space where someone has been looking past you. Be worth it, quietly, consistently, without announcement, and let everything else take care of itself. Take care of your mind. The world will take care of itself. Until next time. If this video gave you something real, a reframe, a principle, a way of walking into tomorrow's room differently, subscribe to this channel. Next week, we go deeper into the Stoic principles that help you build the kind of presence that no room, no shift in culture, and no amount of being overlooked can touch. Subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. And if someone in your life is going through this right now, share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the reminder that they were never as invisible as the room made them feel.